So now, let's look at this again. What do you think the function might be based on this? Why do you think it might be attention?
He got to go for a walk with his teacher. Maybe that's happened before.
Okay, so he's not interacting with anybody, and then he has a tantrum, and now he gets some one-on-one attention by somebody. That's a good one. Okay, anything else? Escape. Why do you think it's escape?
Playing with the ball, which he may have been enjoying, but the math sheet was presented, and maybe he didn't want to do the math. By having the tantrum, he got to go for a walk and escape from doing the math.
Okay, so it could be escape because when he engaged in the behavior, the math sheet was taken away and he didn't have to do it anymore. Any other ideas?
Could be access as well, because he wants to go outside.
Maybe he wants to go outside. Maybe he wanted a break. So we don't really know what the function of the behavior is based on this incident, do we? It still could be all of those things. So we have some really good information at this point, but can you draw up a treatment plan based on one incident of behavior? You need lots of them because you need to look for patterns. But what kinds of things could we be looking for that maybe we have control over, that maybe we could change, that might motivate this child to make a different response? What are some of the specific things in here that you might be able to change?
Take him for a walk.
Okay, so you could change parts of the consequence. Maybe you don't take him for a walk if he's engaged in behavior. Okay, so maybe he doesn't get a squeeze ball ahead of time. Give him the squeeze ball afterwards. Those are some things that you could do.
Give him a warning that he's going to do the homework or the math in a certain period of time, so he can select.
So instead of taking the squeeze ball immediately away and giving the math sheet immediately, maybe break those two things up a little bit.
More positive reinforcement. I like how you're sitting in your chair. We're going to take the squeeze ball away. You're going to do your math. I like how you're sitting there, not throwing the paper on the floor.
So maybe adding some other kind of a consequence.
Somebody already mentioned the first math sheet, then take a walk or something like that.
Okay, so maybe adding the consequence that he's getting here for completing the work instead of for So there are lots of things in here that we could change, and we don't know exactly which part is the most important thing to change, but now we've got more information. And what we need from here is even more information, because we don't know, out of all those really great ideas, we don't know which one's going to work, because we don't know what the function of the behavior is. And if we know what the function of the behavior is, we can identify not only which one's going to work, but which one's going to work the best, because we'll know why he's doing it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want you guys to take a look at this. You guys can hopefully read it up here. You have it in your PowerPoint. I'm sure it's pretty small. I want you to read through this, and I want you to, as a group, see if you can put this into ABC format. Okay? So if you guys are done, go ahead and talk amongst yourselves to try to figure out. There's lots of things going on in here. Remember I said we need to write it in narrative form? This isn't one incidence of behavior. This is multiple incidences of behavior with multiple antecedents and multiple consequences. So try to identify each of Jessica's behaviors and then define the behavior as it's in there and then write down the thing that happens before and the thing that happens after. So if I was going to put it into ABC format, I would have an A and a B and a C. Okay, so usually when I do this, I like to start with the B because that helps me kind of direct my information. So what's the very first behavior that she does in this scenario? Pacing back and forth. Does everybody have pacing back and forth? Okay, so pacing. What happened right before she was pacing? She was watching a DVD. Okay, is everybody?
She was by herself.
She was by herself. Okay, so by self, watching TV. Okay, anything else that you guys want to add to the antecedent that you think might be important? Okay, so she went into the kitchen. Went to, well, actually, going into the kitchen, that's her behavior. We don't want to write that because this is her behavior. That actually happened after or before she was pacing? Okay, so that would have been a behavior up here. So she was doing these things.
Oh, mom was making dinner.
Mom was making dinner. Mom making dinner. Okay, so let's think about what happened after pacing.
Oh, mom is. She started to cry.
So that's her behavior. So if she cried, that's her next behavior down here. What happened after pacing?
Mom is.
Okay, so mom said, "What do you want?" Okay, so this is the first one. Do we agree that she was kind of by herself? She was watching TV. Mom was making dinner. There was really nothing going on for her, right? She was just kind of hanging out. And then she came into the kitchen and she's pacing back and forth. And then based on that, her mom notices her pacing back and forth and she goes, "Oh, well, what do you want?" And that's the first interaction. Is the second behavior crying? Is that the very next thing that Jessica does?
No, she didn't respond.
Okay, so her mother says, "What do you want?" And then Jessica did not respond, but instead she started to cry. So her next behavior is crying. Okay, so what happened right before she cried? Okay, but
Screaming for herself to the floor.
okay, those are not, she didn't do that before she cried. The previous consequence, right. Mom says, "What do you want?" So this is actually the antecedent for the next behavior here, which is crying. Okay, so that can happen. The consequence can also trigger another behavior. Okay, so her mom says, "What do you want?" She starts to cry, and then what? What's the next thing that happens after she started to cry? So what was the interaction? Okay, so her mom continued. She didn't really do anything when she cried?
She asked her if she wanted something else.
Yes, so she wanted something else, but then she
Okay.
continued.
Okay, so mom's still cooking. Mom cooking. And also says, "What do you want?" again. Is that right?
No, well, actually, no, dinner will be ready soon.
Dinner ready soon. Okay, so all of this kind of happens as part of the consequence. So what's the next behavior that Jessica does? Okay, so then she screams. What happens right before she screams? Okay, so dinner ready soon. Dinner ready soon. She screams, then what happens?
Mom's still talking.
Oh,
Specific.
Okay, so do you want something to eat? Okay? What's the very next behavior that Jessica does? So she screams again. What happens right before she screams? The same thing again, right? So she says, do you want food? Do you want... She screams. What happens after she screams?
Chips.
Okay, offers chips. All right. What's the next thing that Jessica does? So she screams again. What happens right before she screams?
Chips.
Okay, so we have chips, screams, then what? Offers apple and juice? Just apple. And then after the apple, does she scream again?
Yeah.
Okay, so she screams again with the apple. And then after she screams when the apple's offered, then what? Okay, so then she's given juice. Then what happens? Okay, so screaming goes down when she's offered juice. Then what? Want juice. And then what? Okay. Stands. So this is offer juice. She stands up and then she gets juice. Okay. Gets juice. Okay. By looking at this interaction, what did you learn? The consequences can also be antecedents, because you can see how her behavior gets triggered by the thing that follows the last behavior, so that's important. What else did you learn?
It looks like mom assumed she was hungry, which caused the behavior, but actually she was thirsty.
Okay, so mom is reading her behavior, and what is the function of the behavior?
Communication.
Well, it's communication, but what's the function? Remember we had 4 functions?
Tangible.
Access or tangible, right? So she wants something. Mom kind of knows that she wants something because all of these behaviors are communicating that she wants something, right? Because behavior is communication. We talk about that all the time. But does mom know what she wants? Mom doesn't know what she wants. So our intervention can really focus on what? Asking for what she wants, indicating in a very specific way what she wants. That way mom doesn't have to guess. Because if we teach this child to indicate what she wants, even if it's juice, apple, chips with a picture card, then mom doesn't have to guess, and that's going to decrease the behavior. If we just identify the behavior and we figure out screaming needs to decrease, but we don't know why screaming is occurring in the first place, we might not pick the thing that's actually going to replace screaming appropriately, and we're never going to be successful at reducing that behavior. But this ABC data helps us to start to help mom change things as well. So there are some things that we can do to pre-teach, but then there's also some things that we could maybe do to help mom determine how to get this process to happen faster. What was her name, Jessica? If Jessica comes in right here and she's pacing, has she really had a problem behavior yet? Not necessarily, but she's in here indicating that she wants something. At this point, this is a good place to then pull out the cards for communication and say, which one do you want? Or pull out, open the refrigerator or open the pantry and have her pick something, or put out her favorite things that she likes to eat at that point. And then you could potentially avoid all of this by teaching mom to recognize it here. So there's a lot of things that you could do with just that little narrative there that gives you a lot of information, right? Okay, so one of the other thing that our data tells us, though, is when we can teach something, too. Because remember at the very beginning with the pacing, that helps us to identify, by taking this ABC data, it helps us to identify that incidental moment when we can embed a teaching opportunity. So that helps us with our functional communication training, which is what is ultimately going to reduce the behavior. And we're going to talk more about functional communication training after lunch. When you think about a replacement behavior, you're also going to want to think about something that's not going to take a lot of effort, because the behavior is pretty easy to do. All he did was throw a chair. So if we want him to pick something else to do instead, we want to make sure that we're picking something that's going to be just as easy and just as effective, or he's not going to switch his behavior. And we'll also talk a little bit more about that after lunch. We also want to think about how successful they are. So a lot of times people want to teach like verbal speech to people who don't have very good verbal skills. And if I can't articulate what I want, that might be very difficult as a mode of communication. So one of the things that I offered with the example with Jessica was the picture exchange rather than the verbal speech, because she already didn't have verbal speech and that would have been very difficult.